We can start again.
No. I like it. Let's keep rolling because I can cut it out.
Fuck it, we'll do it live.
Hello and welcome to the Games That Made Us podcast. I'm Brent. I'm here with my friend Kirk. Say hi, Kirk.
Bonjour. Getting kind of worried. I'm running out of languages that I actually know, and I don't want to make anything up.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, because what's eventually going to happen is you're just going to speak pure gibberish, and then we're going to find out that it's actually some horrible insult in like Swahili, and then we're going to get canceled, and that'll be a whole thing. I'm not ready for that. Too young to get canceled. So what you drinking over there, buddy?
I am drinking Boulevard's Irish Ale. It usually only comes out in the late winter, early spring type.
Right.
And it's honestly one of my favorite beers of all time, so I hoard it.
Yeah. I that's one of my favorites of theirs. I like most of their seasonal stuff. It's not my favorite. I think the Nutcracker is my favorite Boulevard.
That's classic, yeah.
But that's also
winter warmer.
Yeah, if you have like 4 of those, you're probably gonna be winter warming yourself in bed.
Yeah, I
think
the
next 6 hours.
If I remember correctly, it's 6.8.
Yeah,
ABV. Winter warmer.
Yeah, that was part of the problem with our last couple episodes was that the beers that I was drinking when we were over at Fringe were like 8-9% beers too. Mm-hmm. And then the barrel proof whiskey, and it's like, oh god, that's why I sounded shit faced. I was shit faced.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy you bring that up because I was going to talk about it. Yeah. So if you've listened to episode 2, hopefully, you kind of know the situation that was going on that day where we went out to a brewery at noon, had some beers there, as Brent referenced,
right.
And then we met a nice man named Daryl. Who gave
very
us
pleasant.
Yeah, he was actually pretty cool. I thought he was gonna be a hillbilly. He was more of like an old roadie, if anything.
What do you have against hillbillies, Kirk?
Besides everything?
besides all of the things?
Yeah. But he gave us that whiskey, and then we came back and re-recorded, and we drank some more while we were doing the golf episode. And then after that, we were like, oh, well, we still have time. Let's go get some food, and then we'll record another episode because I'm already here.
Right.
So Brent, being the gracious host he is, brought me to a really cool Mexican joint in town that I'd never been to before.
Yep. And
I saw that they had margaritas on tap.
Yes.
Now, how the fuck am I not gonna go for
right.
that? So,
and they're so good too.
Yeah, we get some food, and of course, I'm just ordering and drinking margs like a horrible bridesmaid or something. Like it's really bad. Like maybe all the other bridesmaids are getting picked up. You know, the ones that are single. Like things just aren't going my way, so right. I'm just drinking. Hoping some guy is just like, I'm gonna pick that one. She's drunk and ready to go.
The last slice of penis-shaped cake is gone.
Yeah. I was drinking to that level. And then, of course, you know, as we normally do at the beginning of each episode, we talk about what we're drinking.
Right.
And we were drinking that episode, too.
Right.
And I started cussing like a sailor. Yeah. And I felt so bad afterwards. So, not long ago, Brent tossed me the working audio for episode 3.
Yeah.
So, if you've listened to that, hopefully it's turned out okay.
I think it will. I think it will. It's going to be like 55 minutes of an hour and 35 minutes of recording time. So that tells you everything you need to know about the editing process there. But
so I'm like on my best behavior today because listening to that working track that Brent sent me, I'm like, oh my God, is this an allegory for our friendship currently? If I become that bad of a friend because it is edited to the point where, and again, he's still working on it, but going through my head and then also listening back to my raw audio track of my own that I have, I'm like, oh my God, he is having to do so much editing because I'm cursing and saying like the most offensive shit I can come up with at the time because I'm loaded. And it's like the whole track is just like a gutted trout where you know like you caught it and you're gonna eat it, and you know cleaning fish is always going to be messy,
Right.
It just starts to fall apart at some point, especially when you're just like, shit, I didn't prep the pan right, and now my kitchen stinks real bad. Like, it just off the rails. Like, I had to talk to my wife about it. I'm like, it's kind of a mess, and it's all my fault.
Aww.
And then my wife is just like, well, what did you say? So I kind of clue her in on what we were talking about. She's like, you're being a bad friend. You need to knock it off. So, best behavior. I'm sober. I just opened this beer now.
Yes.
Brent and I don't know if he's drank already,
nope.
but like it's not like last recordings where we're jumping out to random bars in town or going to a brewery. Like everything is normal.
Yeah.
So I should sound at least more coherent and not slurring everything.
Other than the 6 shots of Everclear that I just had, we're perfectly sober. I also like that recording a video game podcast is like cooking a gutted trout.
Yeah.
That's going to be my new...
It got to, like, did you ever watch that episode of Drawn Together where Foxy Love is making, or she's mad because the producers can just kind of cut whatever she says and mash it together and make her say whatever she wants?
Right.
They do it right after she says that, and she says, my taint is made out of bacon. And she's like, damn it, they did it again. But of course, she ones up, and she's like, oh yeah, what was I saying? Anyway, yeah, my taint, 100% pure bacon.
There you go.
But that's what like the beginning of that episode sounded like, where Brent is just trying to make sense of this chaos, and I'm listening to it, just going, oh no, you know,
what
it's
have
like
we done?
Yeah, like I was straight up Ralphie in A Christmas Story who just stepped on his fucking glasses, and I'm like, I am just a bad person, and I've ruined everything. And now I have to go inside and make up a story to Mom to make sure, you know, I'm not going to get in trouble and the podcast is going to be taken away from me. You know?
Right. Right. An icicle fell and hit my computer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you didn't ask me, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I am drinking a Dale's Pale Ale, which I swear to God I do drink other things other than Oscar Blues.
Yeah, I think every episode it's like...
Every episode has been Oscar Blues up to this point.
Now you go on a long tangent about how I'm breaking your show.
Right. It's so good, and Kirk is breaking my fucking show.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
I assume there's some level of comedy that I'm supposed to be hitting, but I don't have it.
Right. No, I
put that on my tombstone.
There's a level of comedy I'm supposed to be hitting, but
I just don't have it.
No, and I think it's going to turn out fine. I think every episode we've recorded up to this point, when I hit stop, I'm like, that was a fucking shit show, and it's going to sound like garbage. And then by the time it hit, I post it on Libsyn and put it in our RSS feed. I'm like, I feel pretty good about that, actually. That actually sounded okay. So I get to be there every step of the way. You like put the baby in the cradle and like put it in front of the nuns, and then you run away. And then I have to take the baby and raise it and develop it into a full human being, and then I send it to boarding school, and then that's great.
No, I'd say it's more like I put the baby in the cradle and then put it in the river to float down, and then to add an extra layer of difficulty, I start firing flaming arrows at it like a Viking funeral.
Yeah.
And then you're like trying to walk out in the river with a shield trying to protect the baby. Like I am the chaos button that we just need to rein in sometimes.
Well, it's good that there is some chaos. Like Erin and I were talking about, she's like, if it was just you by yourself, it would be the most like pocket protector pushing my taped up glasses. Well, actually, for active entertainment, you know,
this game is so super wicked awesome.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, no, I would just gush about how much I love these strange random arcade games, and that would pretty much be the whole thing.
And I'm happy just to have this, you know, to clue in all of our fan of the chaos that goes on in the background.
Yeah.
we're normal people, I think. Well, normal's kind of purely subjective there.
Sure. It's like a 6 out of 10. I almost want to call out our one YouTube fan that we're not affiliated with by like the guy's handle, but I'm like, no, that seems a little be a little creepy. Well, I'll just say it this way. I saw that somebody subscribed to us on YouTube who I didn't know, and I watched some of your videos and they were super cool. So like, thank you.
Yeah, especially when I can't even get my own family to listen to it.
Right. We appreciate it, random person who's also interested in emulation, because you're making our dreams come true by listening to our terrible podcast. So thank you. So today we're going to be talking about 2 PC games. One's from 1999, one's from 2005. Hey guys, future Brent here. Just a quick editor's note. This episode was originally supposed to be Fear and Alpha Centauri, but Kirk and I really, really, really like Alpha Centauri, and we wound up talking for quite some time. And then we even came back later and talked a little bit about the expansion, Alien Crossfire, which I hadn't played before. We're still going to do Fear, but you'll hear some references to it in this episode. I do apologize for that. I thought it was better to just be honest that we didn't get to it rather than try and cut around it and turn it into, as Kirk said earlier, a gutted trout. So, this episode will just be Alpha Centauri and its expansion Alien Crossfire, and we will be getting to Fear on our next episode. So be on the lookout for that. Because the whole idea of this podcast was supposed to be video games that were influential to us. And I think both of us, our initial instinct was like to go to kind of early 90s stuff, because it's like everybody loves Super Nintendo, everybody loves Genesis, everybody loves these kind of old early console games. But for both you and I, a lot of our history with video games is PC focused. Mm-hmm. And so what we wanted to do with this episode is step away from a lot of those classic console-based retro games that everybody talks about, everybody loves.
Yeah, we really didn't want this to turn into the Super Nintendo podcast.
Right. There's already, first off, there's already so much great media out there about that kind of golden era gaming. Like, have you ever watched SNES Drunk?
Yes.
I love that guy. Like that, he's one of my very favorite YouTubers. I love the no nonsense, like 5-minute time capsule video game reviews of something from 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. So what I think we'll do is we'll start with Alpha Centauri. Kirk, do you want to tell us a little bit about the release info on that?
Well, Alpha Centauri, everyone just says Alpha Centauri, just like how we call Civilization Civ. We don't say Sid Meier's Civilization, even though, it's on every box, and rightfully so. Right. But it is a Sid Meier's game. Brent already said it came out in 99.
Yep.
It's basically a Civ game that expands outside of our own solar system, and instead of doing a classic Civ game where you play as Greece or America or whatever, this is a totally new.
Always India. Always India. Be Gandhi. Nuke everyone.
Yeah, there you go. It is a turn-based game, just like Civ. Right. Base building and resource gathering, but it's the exact same kind of turn-based style as even modern day Civ games. It's all the same.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's because this is the era when Sid Meier had split off from Microprose to start Firaxis, and so they didn't have the direct rights to Civilization yet, and so part of the reason why Alpha Centauri is the way it is because it's quote-unquote like a spiritual successor to Civilization 2, because if you remember, at the end of Civilization 2, one of the paths to victory is to go to Alpha Centauri. Mm-hmm. And so this game picked up directly after that. But so I think it's really interesting because much more so than many of these like 4X type games, this game actually has a plot and a storyline, and it opens up with this cinematic, which was totally mind-blowing to me the first time I saw it. It's a, full motion video where it goes through the history of what's happened on Earth from about 2060 forward. And so it talks about how there's like war and famine and all these horrible things. And so the United Nations builds a ship, loads it full of colonists, and sends it to Alpha Centauri.
Called the Unity.
The Unity, yes, exactly. When they get almost there, there's some kind of issue. There's damage to the ship. There's something that causes them to split off. And the 7 most influential leaders on the Unity each lead their own crew, their own faction, into a different escape pod and land on a different part of the planet. And these factions are split by ideology rather than nationality. So you've got a group that is devoted to pure capitalism. You've got a group that's devoted to science. You've got a group that's devoted to ecology. You've got a group that's devoted to peacekeeping and trying to
like the actual representative from the United Nations themselves. Because it is alluded that on the Unity, there was like a central commander who, again, Unity it brings all the factions together because they realized they needed that. And they allude to that he was, I think, assassinated.
Okay.
Or there's some sort of subterfuge of the ship, or something happened, which is what caused the main section of the ship to explode to begin with.
Okay.
Like there was something horribly wrong, and they never really say later on who did it, but they don't really need to. They just needed that plot point.
I mean, it was the Chinese guy. Yeah.
Blame it on,
Yeah, it was.
It's easy to blame him.
Yeah, it was the Hive.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And so then there's Lao, who leads like the UN faction.
Yep.
But so
honestly the biggest dick too. But we can talk about that later. I hated him.
Oh yeah.
He's supposed to be like the peacekeeper.
I never play as him.
Like he's so awful.
No, I'm always Deirdre Sky, the Brotherhood of Planet or whatever. The
fascinating.
Yeah, the ecology.
Really?
Always.
I'm always either the University or the Spartans.
University is Zakharov, right?
Provost Zakharov. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, and then I forget the Spartans. She's Hispanic. I can't remember her name.
Colonel Santiago.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
But so these 7 factions land on Alpha Centauri, and I love it because it gives a reason for the setup that every 4X game has, which is I start out and I have a city with a population of 1 unit.
Yeah, just like a Civ game.
Right, and it's like but in a Civ game that makes no sense. Because even you should have more dichotomy between the different groups, right? When Egypt started and when Greece started, they were in very different places in terms of their development.
Well, Brant, that doesn't make for very good gameplay.
I know. No, and that's exactly right. So in Civ or any of these other more historically based 4X games, you have to make compromises to the plot in order to make the gameplay work. But Alpha Centauri has this beautiful mesh of the two where the plot sets up the gameplay and makes the gameplay make more sense. But so then you've got the 7 factions, they land, they start establishing themselves on planet, and as they expand and begin to colonize the planet and terraform it, they start learning that the planet itself is not just a ball of rock with living things on it.
Yeah, they're not alone, for sure.
Right. And depending on how you choose to play the game, you're going to see more or less of that interaction with Planet. And Planet winds up becoming a character in the story.
Yeah, like full-on antagonist, if you really want to go that far. Depending on how you play it, it really will
fuck your shit up.
Yeah, it might as well be in a faction of its own.
Right. Which is part of the reason why I love playing Deirdre Sky, because you start out with the ability to capture the mind worms. You start out with the ability to interact with Planet on a positive term.
So go ahead and talk about the mind worms more. So you just brought up mind worms,
yes.
And the audience is just like, wait, what? That's kind of a huge jump. So
yes, okay.
So we were kind of alluding to that they're not alone on this planet,
right?
But I'm going to let Brent go ahead and fill you guys in.
if you think back to Civilization or Civ 2 or Colonization or any of Sid Meier's earlier 4X games, there's always tribal peoples on the outskirts that will fight you. That they have the red color flag, and they're, depending on how you push out into those outer areas outside of your cities, you'll wind up running into them.
Like the newest Civ game, the Barbarians.
Right.
Same thing.
Exactly. But as the game progresses in Civilization, they get progressively weaker and weaker and weaker relative to the civilizations.
And then just full on disappear in some cases.
Right. Alpha Centauri flips that. Alpha Centauri, you're interacting with the planet, and the planet has two main ways that it tries to push back against human colonization. One is the fungal blooms. They're represented by this kind of red earth on the world map,
like this pink, reddish, mossy kind of.
Yeah,
and it grows. It's not static. It'll pop up anywhere, and it'll keep growing from there.
Right, and it actually reminds me of the remake War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise.
Yes, that's very, very good.
Yeah, I wonder if they pulled that from Alpha Centauri, because it definitely has the same kind of vibe.
It is strikingly similar.
Yeah. And they have a gameplay effect. They make it harder for your units to traverse over them.
You have to clear it to make farmland. You have to get rid of it first before you can even plant a farm or put a mine or whatever in that tile.
Right. And so it makes it more difficult for your, what you would call in Civilization, workers, but they're called formers in Alpha Centauri, to terraform the land and build improvements. The other thing is the mindworms, and the mindworms are, and there's also a water version of the mindworm called the Isle of the Deep, I think.
Yeah, there's Isle of the Deep, and then, there's even flying ones too.
Yeah.
It really depends on where you're at in the game
right.
and how the planet starts reacting to you. But honestly, think of them as like the native creatures that have always been there this entire time. They just either are hostile against you or not. So think of it as like the fungus is like, the bees that take care of the flowers here on the planet. Well, the mindworms were already there with the fungus from the get-go, but how they react to you is kind of how you play the game.
And what I think is really interesting is there are these cutscenes throughout the game where it'll either have a video or just a text dump, but it'll tell you kind of, and they're called interludes from the Book of Planet. And it will tell you a long-form narrative of a thing that just happened. So, for example, the first time that mindworms get into one of your colonies, it will trigger an interlude from the Book of Planet, and it will tell you what that looks like. And the mindworms, the reason they're called that is that they don't actually attack physically. They use psionic attacks. They attack people mentally.
I do have to kind of cut you off. They do attack physically. If you remember some of the videos, you do see the worms latched onto people's bodies and physically attacking them. So they do attack mentally, but they also at the same time attack physically. They rely on the psychic characteristic to basically paralyze their subjects before actually attacking them. The psychic part or the psionic waves are meant as like a snake has venom.
Right.
It's that same kind of deal.
Fair enough.
They even have a graphic part where they talk about where the mindworm will latch onto its subject and then wrap its larva around the subject's brain. It gets really cool. So they do absolutely attack physically. Sorry, I had to cut you off there.
No.
I'm they do. They really do.
Fair enough.
Very horrifically.
That's fair enough. But yeah, I love the fact that, and this becomes a running theme throughout the game, the psychic attacks, the fungal blooms are all part of the planet's response, almost like an immune response to human beings being there. And as you progress through the game, you can, depending on what technologies you choose from the tech tree, you can interact more and more positively or negatively with planet. And you can actually get to the point where it's kind of you and the planet versus the other factions.
Yeah.
Which, again, is always my strategy. I think it's funny. So a lot of the people that I've talked to about this game usually pick Zakharov, pick the science faction, because you can blast through and build up your technology really, really quickly. As with any Civ game, like, that's a really good idea. That's a really solid strategy. But for whatever reason, I always liked the role-playing aspect of Deirdre Sky. And again, this game has such good potential for kind of role-playing with those characters, because they're all so interesting and different. Let's talk a little bit about kind of our experience with the game, and I think also maybe get into a little bit of, again, how we bonded over it a little bit. But so I alluded to this earlier. When I was a kid, initially, like a young kid, I was really an arcade kid. We didn't have video game consoles at home at all. And so I still have this like really deep arcade roots, which comes up occasionally in some of these episodes. But the first video game console that we ever had was that Super Nintendo that my dad randomly brought home. And that was the last video game console that we brought into the house until like 2001. I got an N64, and the GameCube was already out. The PS2, I think, was already out by that point. The N64 was not a new console, but I loved it. But so there was a stretch there where if I wanted to play anything that was new, or if I just wanted a new game, because we didn't have even many like used game stores around, I was playing it on a PC. And I got really big into strategy gaming. That was kind of my niche. I loved Warcraft. I loved Civilization, which we mentioned. Colonization was great. I love SimCity. All of the Maxis sim games I played the shit out of. Sim Earth, Sim Ant, all these stupid games. But Alpha Centauri was one that I remember. There was that rack in Walmart of like the jewel-cased video games. And I would walk by it every day, or every time my mom went to the store, and look at it and go, that looks so cool, and it's Sid Meier, and I'd pick it up and just kind of like fondle it and love it and want it. And finally it dropped down from whatever it was, 30 to 20, and I was like, okay, I'm buying this fucking game. And just the excitement of booting it up for the first time and that opening cinematic that it plays just burned itself into my brain, because it's such a one more turn game. All of these 4X games are like that. You get into it and you're just like, just one more turn. Just one more turn.
Yeah, that's literally an option at the end of the Civ games, where they say that just one more turn.
Right.
So you can keep playing even after you win.
Well, and the game even tries to guilt you into playing longer. Mm-hmm. I thought it was funny because I'm playing Link Between Worlds, and it's got the thing where it'll pop up and say, hey, you've been playing for a long time. You should take a break, probably. Meanwhile, Alpha Centauri is, please don't go. The drones need you.
They look up to you.
They look up to you.
Please don't go. The drones need you. They look up to you.
It's like, oh, okay, fine, one more turn. And it did. It wound up becoming, for, a lot of summers, it was Alpha Centauri and just burning my way through it.
I really relied on PC gaming because the last console my family ever bought, my mom or my dad, doesn't matter, was the Sega Genesis.
Yeah.
After that, any console we had was because one of my family members, one of my siblings, what have you, had bought it themselves. Same thing when it comes to PC gaming. That was all 100% me. So it wasn't as if one of my other siblings had a PC or anything like that, or even the family had a PC. We had a Tandy brain computer in our house. That was the most advanced computer we had for many, 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 many years.
I've never actually seen a Tandy.
So when the house got like an actual quote unquote modern PC, it's because I had been working my ass off,
Sure.
gathering money, then using the money to buy and build a computer using parts that I found at garage sales and what have you.
Nice.
And luckily I had some knowledge and direction from my brother-in-law who was big into IT at the time. So he helped me point in the right directions of things I was missing. Because you got to remember, back in this day, internet was still like dial-up. And there wasn't there wasn't as big of a library on how to build a computer where you can just YouTube that anymore.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it was you had to read like Popular Mechanics, or you had somebody who was already in IT. So once I figured that out, built my first computer. I think I was like 13.
Yeah.
It was an old E-Machine brand with parts Frankensteined into it.
Nice.
So I started getting into games more and more. And back in the day, Kmart, Walmart, whatever. I didn't really see the jewel cases very much that Brent was talking about. They were still sold in like big, gigantic boxes for some stupid reason, even though it was a jewel case inside, but the box was enormous.
Yeah.
That was still funny to me. And one day, I had another friend who, his family had a really good PC.
Yeah.
You know, like the first Sims that came out, we talked about that.
Yes.
Doom, whatever happens to be, a SimCity 2000. You know, games started getting better and better.
Quake.
Quake
was probably one of them.
He brought up, Quake.
Yeah.
He eventually brought up this game that his dad had bought, because his dad was big into Civ.
Right.
Bought Alpha Centauri.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, if you say it's good, it's got to be good. At that point, I'd never played any Civ games yet.
Oh, so this was your intro?
Yes, this was actually my intro into Civ games.
Oh, that's a good intro.
Yeah. So I went over to his house, and I watched him play it, and then I played it, and then we played it together. I got hooked.
Yeah.
I eventually borrowed the CD and, kind of put it on my computer too, which this was during the time where you could do that.
Yeah.
You just needed that license key on the back, and that was it. Because, again, the internet wasn't really a thing, so they didn't have DRM or anything like that back in the day.
Oh, God, yeah.
Didn't really need the CD to play. At least I don't recall ever needing the CD in the thing to play. I think it was because that was at that time in PC gaming where you just needed to install it, and it just needed the license key, and then...
Well, and
that was the end user license agreement. Don't give it to your friends. That was about it.
The very second that the internet got out to where I lived, no CD patches were everywhere on the internet. So it took about 30 seconds to. No, this is everyone I know has a copy of this now.
So I played the hell out of it. Then I would eventually jump into there, and it led to my my entire love affair I have with games like the Dawn of War series.
Yeah.
But that's more real time strategy versus turn based. But still, this day I love turn based strategy games.
Yep.
The same company would go on. Who did Alpha Centauri would go on to do like XCOM, which is another turn based strategy game.
Yep.
Huge into those games. So, do you want me to talk about how this game actually is one of the reasons why you and I are friends?
Yeah, man.
Do you want me to say it from my side of the story?
Yeah, do it.
Is it more interesting that way?
I think so.
So, Brent was a fucking nerd on Potsy proportions when I met him.
This is shocking no one.
I just went right out of the gate. Just like, yeah, Brent kind of sucks. No, I'm just like... so we both went to the same university together, and we both... Well, he lived just like a couple floors below me in the high rise. But like I got to know his roommate randomly and some of the people Brent was hanging out with. And I would go down one day to my friend's dorm room, and Brent was his roommate.
Right.
And Brent was just... He really was a nerd. Just such a nerd. Every interaction I even had to him to this point, like outside of his own dorm room, was just like, God, this kid kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And then when I went and actually saw where he slept at night, I'm like, wow, what was I expecting, I guess? From a kid who wore like straight leg Wrangler jeans that actually fit him, like white tennis shoes, clean shaven, buzz cut, just and then he and it made made perfect sense to me when I found out a little bit about him even later that he was homeschooled a lot. I'm like, you think?
Yeah.
Like that showed through. So the entire time I'd be hanging out with my friend, like Brent would chime in every now and then with, his banter about whatever.
Right.
Well, we were, I think you were big into like soccer management games or whatever.
Yeah.
And Adam, I think we were huddled around your roommate's computer.
Right. Yeah.
We were talking about games we really, really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm like, oh yeah, this one game I really, really loved. I don't have it anymore. I lost the disc long ago. Well, in reality, it didn't belong to me. It was a friend's.
Right. Yeah.
I had my own computer in my dorm room and everything, as did the roommate. So.
You stole it.
Yeah. So I'm
God.
I used to. This reminds me of the game Alpha Centauri. I played it all the time.
Right.
Brent might as well have shot up out of his fucking chair.
Yeah.
Was just like, oh, Alpha Centauri, you know about Alpha Centauri? I had like, yeah, man. So that was totally out of right field. Like this kid was such a dork.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was just like,
you like Sid Meier too?
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of like that. We started bantering back and forth, and Brent, no shit, just like he had heard that I didn't have the game anymore, and I really loved it. He gave me his CD so I could go up to my dorm room and then install it on my computer.
Yeah.
Which I did, and then I never gave him the fucking game. I never gave it back to him because I'm like, I'm not giving this game back to this nerd. What's he gonna do? Come up and ask for it?
Right.
And then I did keep that game the entire time, and then I would return it to you half a decade later.
I have it. Hey.
Yeah.
You want to see something crazy?
Yeah.
Hang on.
No.
Right there.
No. Oh man.
That's the disc.
Oh, that's awesome.
I threw out the fucking jewel case because I'm a dumbass, but yeah, no, I still have the disc. Yep.
Yeah, it's just funny how I originally had no intention of giving this game back to the nerd, only for me to voluntarily give it back. Because I'm like, this guy's really cool, and he's like one of my best friends. And
that was one of like when I went up to college, I brought my N64 with Ocarina of Time and Command and Conquer, which I found out recently the fucking N64 port of Command and Conquer is like $80 now. I'm like, why would anyone play that? That was such a broken, shitty version of that game. Like, get it on fucking Steam, you dipshit. But anyway, I got it because it was $5 at fucking Record Warehouse in St. Joe, and it was the cheapest way for me to play the game. But I had like Ocarina of Time, Rogue Squadron, and Command and Conquer for my N64. I only had a couple more games than that, but I didn't bring all of them. And then I brought Baldur's Gate and Alpha Centauri. And it's like, that was the games that I was like, I'm going to bring these up because somebody's going to fucking steal my stuff when I go to college. I know they will.
And
it's right, it was you, motherfucker.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, and it's one of these games that I think in that time and place, like in late 90s, early 2000s, if you were into PC gaming and someone had put this in front of you, you would have been blown away by it. Because it was so deep and it was so much fun.
I think it's still only one of 3 games to ever get a perfect score on, I think, PC Mag, or is it Electronics Gaming Monthly? One of those publications has only had 3 games that have ever got a perfect score.
Yeah.
This game was one of them. And I think it also got that score because the game was so incredibly just available to everybody. You didn't need an extremely powerful computer at any time when that game was released to run it. It's a very simple game as far as specs.
Yeah.
You could damn near run it on a potato and it looks great.
I have a point about that last thing you said. But yeah, no, I just as an aside, so Civilization, because you're like, you could run it on anything, it's true. And that helped it win over Call to Power. Did you ever play Call to Power?
No.
Okay. So when Sid Meier went off and did Firaxis, I think Mike Pros or whoever bought them did another game called Civilization Call to Power. And they came out within like a year or two of each other. And Call to Power was the direct sequel to Civilization 2. And it was the buggiest, most broken. It damn near, my mom and dad had a iMac G3, like purple Molar Mac kind of thing. And I went out and bought Call to Power because I was so excited that there was a new Civ game. And that damn near made the fucking iMac go into space. Like, you could just hear the fucking, like, every drive, the CD drive, the fucking optical drive, everything's, like, spinning at full power. The fan is blasting heat everywhere.
The screen's dimming a little bit
Right.
because of the power draw.
Right? The lights go out in the kitchen.
Yeah. You hear it pop in the other room.
But yeah, like the fucking it's the scene from Christmas Vacation where the auxiliary nuclear and
Yeah, has to throw that big breaker to make it happen.
But that game was, they were directly competing with each other, and it was like the fight for the soul of the Civilization franchise. And Alpha Centauri was so well optimized that you could run it on anything. It had a ton of video options, so you could play it on shitty hardware. Call to Power was like Crisis before Crisis. Like, it ran so hard on everything. And I'm like, well, yeah, obviously Alpha Centauri 1, people could play Alpha Centauri. Eventually, I want to say Sid Meier like sued the company that was making Call to Power, and they were forced to take the Civilization name off it. So it went from being Civilization Call to Power to just Call to Power. I made a sequel to it. It's shit. Don't look that up. That's a terrible game. That, I think, is a key point for why this game was so successful. I will say, talking of it looking great, we mentioned briefly how Lost Vikings had color palette issues.
Oh, yeah.
This game has a color palette issue.
Oh, yeah.
It's ugly.
Mm-hmm.
It's really ugly.
Well, I meant it looked great as in, like, there wasn't, like, noticeable stuttering or anything like that.
Yes, it runs well.
Yeah,
it's a very well optimized
I should have clarified
game.
It would run very well, even on a potato.
Yes, but the one thing that I will say negative about this game is that, there's a lot of games that we talk about where you have to say, well, at the time, it looked really good. Obviously, like, standards and tastes have changed. It's 2024. You have to put your mind in the headspace. No, I remember booting this game up for the first time and going, why is everything red and brown? Mm-hmm. It's fucking ugly.
Yeah, the only break you would get is if you ran into an ocean. It's like, oh, blue, I remember that color.
God. This is we're all gonna live on the coast now.
And then the outside, usually like Civ games, or at least modern ones, will have some fun design outside of the map, like if you hit an edge. No, it was just darkness. It was black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you start complaining about Alpha Centauri's visuals, people will go, well, you have to understand, people, they wanted it to be able to run 256 color mode or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
No, I get that. I recognize that there was a limited palette available. But within that, you can pick any color. Mm-hmm. You don't have to pick all these washed out, nasty ass. Like, there's no contrast on the map at all. Everything is the same level of drab and boring.
Yeah, everything is brown, basically.
Right.
Unless it's a river or the fungus on the planet, it is brown.
It looks like the entire game was, like, tea-washed.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate, too, because each one of the factions, it'll usually display another thing, typically what their city looks like.
Right.
From a different perspective. And you see, like, a completely different landscape.
Yes.
And a completely different sky than what you experience in the game proper. And it was always, like, kind of disappointing.
Yeah.
The bases and the cities, or the buildings within the cities proper were pretty close, but as far as the landscape, it's like, God, I really wish it looked something like that. Yeah. Like, your favorite character, hers was literally bases attached to, like, giant fucking redwood trees.
I know.
And that just is not a thing in this game.
No. There's another thing that I wanted to bring up, and I'm curious about your thoughts on it. And it's the first time that I ever remember a game having this level of it, is all the automation in this game. If you just, have someone come by and hit the next turn, a million times for you, and you go fuck off to the other room. This game kind of plays itself a little bit. Civilization has had the governor in it since, I think, Civ 2, where it'll auto-generate units, but this game will also design units for you. Depending on how you sort of set your system settings, this game automates so much of like the little minutia, and it makes it, I don't know, it's really strange to me, especially for a game in 1999, how much it rewards different styles of play. You can play it super micromanagey and like know what every city is doing, or you can play it kind of hands off and let the game kind of do what it needs to do, and it does pretty well. Like the AI for the automation is pretty good in this game.
I would say, depending on your faction, though, the longer you let that play, the planet's just going to kill you.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. The game for 1999 rewards lots of different styles of play, much more than was common in that era. I think that's part of the reason why, kind of like what we were saying about the technical requirements of it, this game kind of could be a game for anybody. Like if you're somebody like me who wants to click on every city and every unit before each turn, this game will let you do that and reward you for doing it. But if you also just want to kind of click around and you just mostly want to do the diplomacy and the fighting, it'll let you do that too.
There's something about this game too that is just way different than in most modern Civ games, and that's the ability to more granularly go into the units themselves,
right,
and decide what they have. Whereas in any modern Civ game, it's like, oh, well, you have, well, first it's like musketmen, and then riflemen, then infantry, and then, you know, mechanized infantry, etc., and so forth. You can't get down into the specifics of those units. Where in Alpha Centauri, you have the base unit, like you have, or the base part of each unit as technology goes on. Like you have just like a straight up infantry unit, but you can decide what armor do they have?
Right.
What weapon are they carrying?
Yes.
What power plant do they have attached to them?
Yes.
Special abilities, like, you know, can they see further with a better radar? Do they have renewable resources like green technology where they don't require like maintenance to support?
Yeah.
They don't really have that in the newer Civ games, and I kind of miss that. I wish they'd bring it back.
The unit designer was one of my very favorite parts of that game.
So when Brent was saying that the governor would design things for you, it would make up those units on its own based on what it thought you needed. So it would make all those little granular decisions for you if you really wanted it to. And that just doesn't really exist in any of the newer Civ games.
Yeah, it really feels like at points that this game is kind of a cul-de-sac. Like they came up with some really great ideas here, but they really didn't carry them forward into a lot of the other games in the series, or just in 4X games generally, which is unfortunate. Yeah,
and building those units too, I mean, depending on if you were clever enough, you could win rather quickly, especially militarily. It didn't matter if you were against the planet or against another faction.
Yeah.
If you understood the different abilities you could give to the unit, you didn't even need like the most technology.
Yeah.
I always found if you could be the most resourceful, even the lowliest unit could end up just kicking the hell out of the most technologically advanced unit.
Yeah, it's much more balanced, I feel like, than Civ, as an example. Which makes sense, right? Because it's a shorter technological leap from the beginning of the game to the end of the game in this than it is in Civilization, where you're going from, you know, a guy with a spear to tanks.
Yeah, like there's a big technology difference.
Right.
But at least the equivalent in Alpha Centauri would be like, well, do the people on top of the tank, is there an actual gunner with a machine gun, or does that guy have a spear too?
Right.
But it gives you that scope to narrow everything. Narrow scope.
So another thing that I think is really interesting about this game, the music for Alpha Centauri, and it needs to be, right, because it's a strategy game, because it's a game where you're going to be sitting looking at the same thing for a long period of time. The music for this game is really kind of low in the mix and ambient. And it's one of the very few games that I would list as, a top 20 game for me that I've never, outside of playing the game, pulled up the music and listened to.
Yep.
Even once.
It's the same music the entire time, too. So it's not like the more modern Civ games where not only does each leader have their own music and each civilization have their own music, but also the newer games also have variations of that music.
Sure.
And it'll play another, depending on, like, if you communicated recently with this other civilization, it will play "Oh Canada," like if you recently ran into Wilfred Laurel.
That's awesome.
And it really keeps that going. And then, like, if you're doing poorly, like if you're in a Dark Age or a Golden Age, like, it'll even change the tempo and the overall sound of the same song you just listened to. No, Alpha Centauri is the same kind of just, it is almost like creepy-ish ambient music. And it's the same thing for every single faction the entire time.
Right. And I think part of it, too, is this was an early game where we were leaving behind chiptunes and we were going to Red Book Audio for video game music. And I think they kind of got in love with their tech a little bit. Because it's like, yeah, we can make one track that's like 40 minutes long. Because it doesn't loop very much. Like, it does loop, but there's enough little variation in there that you can tell it's like, okay, this is a fairly long track. I'll have to look up and see.
And it will, like, just drop for a while, too.
Yeah.
Altogether. When there's a lot of action going on, it will just stop. To its credit, though, even though it's like the same song, it does give the impression, well, like I said, it was kind of creepy.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. Like, you are on a completely alien planet.
Yeah.
Effectively alone. I mean, you eventually find out you're not, but it does give you, with as simple as it is, it still gives that mystery that you still don't really know where everything is at in this planet. Is there more dangers around the corner? Is the planet going to get weird on you again?
Yeah.
But
yes. Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. Yes, it will every single time.
Every single time.
Every single time.
It's good at what it does, but a lot of these like strategy games with these kind of ambient music, this wound up being my throw the game in, put the, get the game started, pull the CD out, and then throw in Disturbed or Korn or whatever shit I was listening to in, 1999, and throw that on Windows Media Player and listen to that in the background while I was going through this.
Whatever, you're listening to Cisco's Thong Song, I know you.
Oh, fuck yeah. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? But yeah, man, I mean, so that's Alpha Centauri. I think this is one of my favorites. It's a game that I've sunk thousands of hours into. I think it, really the only negative thing I think we said was that the graphics were kind of ugly. Did we have anything negative to say about this game at all?
No, just the music. It had the one ambient track, but that also could be a problem with technology at the time, too.
Yeah.
That they just couldn't fit a WAV, or I don't even know if an OOG file existed back in that day yet.
I don't think
MP3
so.
might have been too big because they had to fit everything into
bet it was
one
WAV.
CD.
I bet it was WAV.
Yeah.
Future Brent. Yep. It's all in WAV. Yeah.
And then the palette, I mean, I could blame them for it, but it never stopped me from playing. I never cared. Because eventually, you when you start building roads and you start building more and more cities, what the planet looks like kind of takes a backseat anyways.
Right.
And it's not. And if you really piss off the planet, well, it goes from brown to fucking fluorescent pink pretty goddamn quick.
Really quick. Yeah. No, it was just encouragement for me to plant forests.
Yeah.
Because it was that nice dark green.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, it's a little less fucking ugly now. I'd plant forests far away from my cities. It not helping me at all. Just like change the fucking palette.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think the gameplay is super fun. We mentioned the AI assistant. I think is really ahead of its time. I love the amount of characterization that went into the different factions and making them feel separate, making them feel unique, without necessarily pinning a particular nationality to it or a particular ethnic group to it. I thought that was really cool. And yeah, I love this fucking game. If you haven't played it, it's on GOG. It's like $5. This would be, get this and get Vampire Survivors. And there's $10 and you have 8,000 hours of gameplay.
Yes. Yeah, and really my hope for the future, not necessarily a final thought on the game proper, but just final thought going forward, is I really, really hope when Civ 7 inevitably comes out, that it will jump into Alpha Centauri, because at the end of every Civ game, or damn near every Civ game of the past 10, 15 years,
right,
the science victory in the game is launching an exoplanet mission. I would love if they gave you the option to continue on that game, so you get all the way to that point and then continue on, and you have to start controlling, like it comes up with a map you can switch between, and you start doing Alpha Centauri type stuff at the same time as also managing Earth, what's going on at Earth, until
that would be so much fun
until the end, because one of the one of the ways of victory in Alpha Centauri is building like a giant communicator to start talking back to Earth,
right,
and then building like a transporter where people can go back and forth. I would love to have that happen in the Civ games, and I really want that to happen, because they did make that Beyond Earth spiritual successor to Alpha Centauri, and it just did not hit home for anybody. There's really nothing to talk about when it comes to that game, because it kind of sucked. I would give me the option of downloading and installing and playing Alpha Centauri or Beyond Earth. Alpha Centauri every time.
Yeah, maybe someday. I'm with you. I think the best route forward for this would be to incorporate it into Civilization, and I think that would be really fun to be able to jump back and forth. We did plan on covering both Alpha Centauri and Fear in this episode. We had a lot to say about Alpha Centauri, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to release this as our first ever one-game episode, and then we are going to bump Fear and do that as a separate episode, which I'm really excited about. That was a game I'd never played before, so it's something that I've got a lot to say, and I know you do too. So, okay, bye. Hey everybody, it's Brent and Kirk again. We just got back together because after we finished the episode on Alpha Centauri, we got to talking. Kirk had mentioned Alien Crossfire in the episode, and I'd never played it. In fact, I was only kind of vaguely aware that it was a thing. So him and I started talking about, maybe we could come back and do a little addendum to our Alpha Centauri episode. I actually looked in my GOG library and realized that the copy of Alpha Centauri I'd bought already had Alien Crossfire, and I'm just a dumbass. So I'm going to turn it over to Kirk, let him talk a little bit about what Alien Crossfire is and kind of the idea behind it. And then we'll talk about our experiences with it. This was my first time playing through it. I actually did 2 playthroughs. And just kind of have this as a fun little bonus content. Also, just kind of behind baseball for you guys. We're doing this as our first ever attempt to record remotely, just because schedules and life stuff. So if the audio sounds a little bit different on this than it did on the regular Alpha Centauri episode, that's why. But yeah, Kirk. Hey, buddy. How you doing?
Pretty good, man. Alien Crossfire was just a simple expansion on Alpha Centauri. It gave you a whole new set of factions to choose from, each with their own kind of unique story of why they are on the Unity or what they are all about.
Right.
With the exception of the introduction of 2 alien races. Or I guess it's one race, but they have different ideologies.
Right.
Because they actually end up just showing up in the atmosphere after you land,
right?
Fighting each other until their ships crash.
Yeah, and I actually, I like I mentioned, I did 2 playthroughs. I did one of them as the quote unquote nice aliens, because there's an alien faction who, from the description, you're thinking, oh, okay, these guys are going to try and get along with humans, and then there's another faction it's very obvious that their intent is just to take over right away. And so I did a playthrough as the nice aliens, and I liked that initial choice was completely superficial, because as soon as you got 10 minutes into the game, all the little cutscenes popping up were like, oh yeah, I mean, we're eventually going to have to conquer all the humans anyway, but, you know.
Yeah. The story behind the aliens is they're one of them is more passive. They're called the caretakers, who is supposed to kind of like the restorers.
Right.
In some ways, while the other side is called the usurpers, which are just like, nah, fuck that and fuck you. We're gonna take all of your shit. And in the game, coming across these aliens is very unique because they go so far as like having problems with just communicating to the aliens, which I love because it's so true. You can't just, even with the advanced technology of landing on another planet, you can't just expect to start talking to an alien race, which could lead to disaster. And they even have their own little little dialogue boxes that pop up that explain like what happened when a unit first encounters another alien unit and their interactions with each other. And then as you start figuring out how to communicate with them, there's entire little dialogue things that go along with that and the stories of how that happened.
Right.
So it's really fascinating, but you learn from right away, don't fuck with the aliens, just leave them alone. They will wreck you if you start attacking them right out of the gate.
They are so overpowered early on in the game. That first playthrough I did as the caretakers. And I did like the backstory where they had already been to Alpha before the humans got there. And so they were surprised that Planet was like up in arms and pissed because of the humans being on Planet. And so and I like how that had repercussions for them as well. That like the mind worms, they're like, oh, these didn't used to be hostile and now they're trying to kill us. What's changed?
Yeah.
I started up and I was like, okay, like just seems like basic Alpha, but I had like more units. I think you start out with 2 military units instead of 1. And matter of fact, the 2 military units I started with, I ended the game with those 2 units still. Like they weren't frontline units for me or anything, but at no point in the whole game did anything kill them. Like I started out on the same continent as, I think it's called Cult of Planet, because I don't know if you had mentioned, I think you did, but the default vanilla Alien Crossfire game, it is 7 entirely new factions. So there's no carryover from original Alpha. You can swap that out if you choose. You can have some of the original factions and some of the Crossfire factions, but by default everybody's new. And so there's the Cult of Planet, which I as soon as I'm reading through the description, I'm like, oh, so they're almost kind of like a more extreme version of the Deirdre Sky. So I started wondering, like, as I was reading some of the descriptions, I was like, you could almost envision, and they kind of skirt around it in the storyline, you could almost envision that the human factions in Alien Crossfire are actually the same factions as in baseline Alpha, and it's just we're 100 years further on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a big talking point of mine. That Alien Crossfire really is, if you were to take those existing factions and just, tweak them or take them to a little extreme, or in my mind, arguably, it's the combination of a couple of the original factions. So you bring up Cult of Planet. Now, to me, that always came off as if you were to combine Deidre with Sister Miriam Godwinson of the Believers, the Christian fundamentalists.
Yeah.
Because the Cult of the Planet is literally just like, we are the voice of the planet in human form, or they say so.
That's
just like how Sister Miriam Godwinson is just like, well, I'm the voice of God, or at least she thinks so.
Right.
But the Cult of the Planet is all about, like, at the same time, even with that fundamentalism, it's fundamentalist towards taking care of the planet,
right,
and responding to her needs.
No, you're fine. I think That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but that makes perfect sense. But anyway, I started out on in my first playthrough. I started out on the same continent as them, and it was just us. And so they started like incurring into my territory, and I'm trying to role play it. Hey, I'm supposed to be the nice aliens, like, so I'm not starting shit. I'm trying to like talk them down, and they like straight up attack me. They roll their fucking Unity Scout Rover right into my fucking, like, right up to my fucking capital. Okay, well now it's on. Like, now we're fucking doing this. And so like by that point I had like 7 or 8 bases. And so I switch them all over to producing guys. None of those guys got finished getting built by the time I'd killed Cult of Planet. Like, it was, I destroyed them with like 4 units. I'm like, motherfucker, these guys are really overpowered, like, early game. Mm-hmm. Like, you could steamroll half of the surface. And I think that honestly may be why they added the other faction that I played as in my second playthrough, why they added it's the Nautilus Pirates, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I wonder if that's why they added them, because they're not on the surface of planet.
They're in the water.
Right. They're not on the land surface of it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there you go. So I always played as the Nautilus Pirates a lot. If I didn't play as the University as a kid, if I was playing Alien Crossfire, and I didn't import or swap out University, I would always play as Nautilus Pirates because he just looks cool.
He is, yeah.
But I like it how his name is fucking Captain Ulrich Svengard.
Right.
But he's from fucking Massachusetts. No, that's real. You can look that up. He's awesome. From, like, he has the most, like, Norwegian name possible. Yeah. Take my cod in a park, you bastard.
I gotta go park my Rover.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always thought that was funny. Like,
yeah.
I wonder what a Norwegian with a Boston accent would sound like.
They start out with only the ability to settle on the water, and then they gain the ability to settle on land, as opposed to everybody else in both the base game and the expansion who's the other way around. And so, kind of like the alien factions, you've got some time in the early game to kind of get yourself straight and get yourself organized and get yourself structured. And that can be really advantageous if that's the way you like to play. Because I'm a planner. I like to build up before I'm running into anything.
Absolutely. When you're playing as the pirates, I always found I would always end up running into somebody long before somebody ran into me.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think they start you with like a transport foil.
Yep.
To transport troops, so like you could always make something that drop them off on a nearby piece of land, and you just start with that.
Right.
But it takes forever for anybody else to actually reach out to you if you were just to not explore at all. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. It does add that extra dimension of you have time.
Yeah.
Compared to a lot of the other factions.
I liked that. I liked the because again, like I'm somebody, like, if I'm playing Age of Empires or a Command and Conquer or RTS games, like I'm somebody who kind of turtles. Like I build the walls, and then I build up my base nice and get my armies looking all nice and perfect before I like go out and try and take anybody on. Mm-hmm. And so the Nautilus Pirates really fit my play style, because I was like, yeah, I want to like control this whole stretch of ocean and make sure that every base has a certain number of units and get all my, like get it all just so before I have to fight anybody.
Yep. I'm the same way in Civ games to this day. Like, especially if I have a mainland or a main continent, like, all right, especially in the later eras of the game, like, okay, every city needs a SAM battery.
Yeah.
And then also a machine gun, ranged infantry kind of unit. And then I have usually like fighter jets, like already on patrolling around each city.
Yep.
So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I get really weird about that too.
Right.
Like, especially if I'm expanding, I'll make a military unit to be a garrison.
Yes.
Before I'll even make the city. I did the same thing in Alpha Centauri and Alien Crossfire. I don't even bother trying to just send out a colony pod without it being protected, because a mind worm will fucking come out of nowhere and bam, lost colony pod. It's like, oh, so I've wasted all those turns on something I'll never get back. Cool. Right. And all those poor citizens in that colony pod died a very, very horrific death.
Yeah, no, I'm a very conservative player in games like this, and so yeah, having the ability to control, one whole chunk of the world map pretty much unmolested for the first, I don't know, it was probably about 30 turns before somebody sent a ship in, maybe 20. It was a while. It was a good long while. Yep. I felt pretty strong by the time anybody wandered by. So that was cool.
I love those factions that they added that, I mean, we made the comparison where it could be a counterpart or a combination of factions from the original game. There are other ones like the Nautilus Pirates where really, because of what they are there is no equivalent in the original game, because there really wasn't anything close to it. However, the other factions, there are some where have an arguable just counterpart. Like, I would say the university's counterpart from the original Alpha Centauri, their counterpart in Alien Crossfire would be the Data Angels.
Yes.
Or the Info Girl with the extra R's.
That.
I'm like, I hate her. I hate her so much. But I would say, just based on stats, that's the direct counterpart to, or complement, not counterpart, but it's better to say complement to the university, where then you get some other weird ones too. Like, I would say where the Hive in the original game, and how they were communistic, obviously. Right. Then in Alien Crossfire, their complement would be the free drones. Yes. But it's weird because they're free drones, but they're also heavily socialistic. And not like democratic socialist. It's like like communism light socialist. So it's very fascinating that where you go from, a communistic state to like, oh, we're kind of communist, but not really.
You could,
it's very.
You could
funny.
almost see like the free drones being the result of like a populist revolution against the Hive. You know what I mean? Where it winds up, because one of the things that I don't know if we covered it when we talked about original Alpha. I mean, we were just so excited gushing about it that there were some things that we didn't get to.
Oh, absolutely.
But I know that I don't think we talked about the whole concept of drones that appears in Alpha, and kind of the whole.
Holy shit, we didn't.
No,
did we?
and it's interesting because, of course, when we're talking about Alpha, we're talking about a natural progression from Civ 2, and in Civ 2 you have slaves. That's a thing that you have access to. And Alpha Centauri doesn't really pull any punches. Even the societies, even the factions that, claim to be democratic and, aiming for, the betterment of all humankind, still have drones. And it's implied that they're basically slaves.
But at least in Alpha Centauri, they just rip that Band-Aid off and just say what it is. But unlike modern day, what you can do to these poor drones is nerve staple them if they get out of line, so which is an atrocity. So it's very fascinating, and it's weird that they never kind of implemented that same system in the later Civ games. I think I get why they wouldn't, but and if you wanted to know, like the equivalent okay, so in Alpha Centauri, the drones, if they're unhappy because of lack of facilities in the base or the city or what have you, they will kind of like get out of control and they'll just stop working and riot.
Drone
riots.
Run into
that and yeah, that you run into the same thing in modern Civ games too, where if you don't have enough amenities, is what it's called in the newer games, your people can revolt. Right. It's the exact same thing, but instead of just outright calling people drones, Civ is just like, oh, they're citizens.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. There is a certain very late 90s thing to this game where it's recent enough to have sort of a cynical worldview, but it's old enough that it feels empowered to be kind of triggering in the way that it talks about it.
Yeah, but it's some of the factions were really interesting. Yeah. Some were exact opposites, which was really cool. But again, like we pointed out before, how some of them were kind of combinations. Like I felt like the cybernetic consciousness was if you were to mix the UN and the university from the original factions and put them together, you'd get the cybernetic nerds. Which, well, not nerds, but you know what I mean. They're cyborgs. Right. They even refer to themselves as cyborgs, which is pretty funny, and I get it. Man, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head the name of any of the other factions. I think we've covered quite a bit of them. That's
most of them. I feel like there's probably one or two, but again, like free drones. Hold on.
So Nautilus Pirates, the free drones, Data Angels, the cybernetic consciousness, the cult of the planet,
and then the two aliens.
Okay, yeah, we covered them. I think we've kind of covered them.
I really liked, by the way, how, because my initial strategy on my first playthrough was I was like, oh, I'll just make friends with the other alien faction, and then we'll just run shit over everybody else. And it locks you out from that. You cannot.
They hate you inherently,
right? And I'm like, that's great.
Yeah,
but because there's nothing else like that in Alpha anywhere where it hard codes a diplomatic state between two factions. This is the only time that I've ever seen it, and so I was like, that's kind of cool. Like that gives it a different flavor than anything else in the game, or the game or its expansion.
Yeah. Did you ever manage to unlock the hidden faction?
No. There's a hidden faction?
It's more like an Easter eggy kind of faction. The Fraxians.
Okay.
The only reason I found out about it is because, digging through the files younger and editing my own factions, I came across this other profile that was there. But yeah, how you would activate it in the normal game, you just like go to the load faction in the faction editor, and it's just one of the default kind of options that's already there. They just don't make it readily available unless you go into the faction editor. But like the picture of their city is just like the Fraxis office buildings.
Nice.
And the like even their bases or cities look like just normal skyscraper buildings. And the picture, I think it's just the Fraxis logo for the it's
that's kick-ass.
Yeah, I thought that's pretty funny. I can't remember the unique thing. They start out with like some like end game level technology they start out with from the very beginning.
Yeah,
I think it's like the whatever gets you like the singularity engine for your units. Okay. Like you just start with that. You don't have any other technologies, but you have that.
That's funny.
But I did like how they added in new Civ games, you would call them natural wonders.
Yeah.
They added the same thing in Alpha Centauri where they have like the crash landing of the Unity itself. And usually in that area, there's like supply pods everywhere. So if you happen to find it first, like they even alert you, like, hey, you found it. And there's supply pods everywhere with usually just technologies and units you can just grab for free, which are really cool. Yeah. And they have like big volcanoes and craters and stuff with names that give you different bonuses compared to the first original vanilla game.
Yeah, they made the map a little bit more interactive than it was in the first game. Because I loaded it up and just did the same thing that I always do, which is just huge map of planet. Mm-hmm. And so that they kept it geographically about the same, but they did add a lot of, like you're saying, like a little bit more detail and a little bit more granularity to it, which made it more fun.
Yeah, and then some new units here and there. Like you told me you got a big kick out of the fungal spores or whatever.
Oh my god, yeah, the big cannons. Because I hate artillery in this game. Like, and I know it's useful, but I don't know, for whatever reason I never build artillery. Like, I don't know, it's just a thing. I don't have any good reason for it. I just don't like it. But yeah, the fungal spore, like, planet artillery, because I captured one right away in my first playthrough as the caretakers. And as soon as I captured one, like, I rolled it up to the that was one of the 4 units I used to destroy the Cult of Planet. I rolled it up to their base and started shelling them, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, I like the fact that I'm bombarding them with, like, fungal growth. That's really cool.
It's like herpes, but with extra steps.
Yeah, exactly.
Planet herpes.
Plurpies.
Yeah, plurpies. Planet herpes.
Plurpies.
Yeah, artillery is definitely a weird function, where in the newer Civ games, they make it very clear, like, your range. Yeah. And how you can hit and what you can hit. Where in Alpha Centauri, it's not. It's kind of the same, like, right-click it, and you're either close enough or you're not. Right. There is no, like, nice modern arcing thing showing you, like, hey, with your artillery, you can do this. And I agree with you, man. I'm right there with you. 9 times out of 10, I just end up building, like, tanks. And just, which are, because siege units aren't really a thing. And Alpha Centauri or Alien Crossfire. The nearest equivalent would be tank units. So once you unlock those, you can just wreck house.
Oh yeah, and I used the I think it's the hover tank is the base unit. That I built so many goddamn hover tanks.
Yep.
I mean that was 90% of not when I was Nautilus Pirates, but when I was caretakers, like, yeah, 90% of my army was that. And then I would just take over an entire continent with that, and then the last continent, that's when they got to start, building improvements to the bases. And then the continent that I just conquered, guess what? More tanks.
I always and later on in the game, I'd give my hover tanks the anti-grab struts, so they move like an extra 2.
Yeah.
And then all my bases, too, were always meticulously connected with mag rails or mag tubes or whatever they call them. So not only do you have a tank that gets to move for free, because they don't let you do that in modern Civ games. Like, the best you can get is just, like, railroads, which is funny to me. It's like, why not mag rail like you did with Alpha Centauri? Why aren't you doing that? It's like, oh, because I can get an entire armada across the planet if I build correctly in less than a turn. Cool. But yeah, so I would get my tanks halfway across the world if it was mostly land, and then those tanks, which already can move quite a bit in their own turn, you give them anti-grav struts, so basically whatever land that didn't have a mag rail, you're kind of making up for it.
Yeah.
You can go from a base halfway on the other side of the world all the way to the other side of the world and attack in the same turn. It's crazy. I love it.
Awesome. It's awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, this game, with the and this is, this isn't specific to Alien Crossfire, but with the unit designer, or the design workshop, I think is the actual name, you can, if you know what you're doing, you can kind of cheese it to where you can make some stuff that's super overpowered.
Oh, absolutely. Like, the reason why I love the university so much, their starting downside was probe teams might as well... Probe teams are the Civ equivalent to spies in the new games.
Right.
So the university was more susceptible to probe teams because, they were the university. They were all about free thinking and the free exchange of information, etc. So... Right. What I always did was eventually there's a secret project you can make called the Great Firewall. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit later on in the game, but it makes your bases completely immune to probe teams. So if you have an entire civilization who is susceptible to probe teams, and if you build that, it's like, cool, so now my civilization has no weaknesses and can just research freely. That was one of the number one reasons I would... always go for the university, or if I played as Morgan Industries, who is that's a vanilla faction.
Yeah.
Yep. It's basically capitalism as if it still existed in the far off future. But the downside to capitalism is you are more susceptible to drone riots, because just like in modern day capitalism, if somebody's winning and making money, that means somebody somewhere is losing. And it's usually the blue-collar workers, or drones, as we've discussed earlier. So, and there's a secret project, I can't remember the name of it, but it ensures that your cities don't have drone riots ever again. So if you are Morgan Industries and you get that secret project, it's like, okay, so I don't have any problems anymore.
The guy who does the voice actor for Nabuta Morgan is like... His voice lives rent-free in my head. I need to go look up who that is. Because anytime when you get tech improvements in the game, it has a little quote from one of the faction leaders that'll pop up. And so you're constantly hearing the voices of all the different faction leaders. And yeah, the guy who is the Morgan Industries head has the most sonorous, just badass voice, and I just love listening to him talk.
To the system. He who controls the sources of energy controls the means of survival. CEO Nabuta K. Morgan, the Centauri monopoly.
I have that same feeling when it comes to Colonel Santiago from the vanilla version. For a militaristic leader, she is so her words are so soft. Yeah. There's one, I can't remember the name of the technology, but she's basically describing military training and how she, either the trainer or she broke somebody's arm in their close combat training.
He held his arm too stiffly, and so was thrown back repeatedly, until at last I seized his forearm and snapped it back against itself. His training suffered while the arm healed, of course, but I felt this was a lesson he must learn early.
And it's just... Well. It makes it seem like it's totally just, normal.
Well, and Kirk, her voice might have been soft, but you were not.
Okay, fair.
All right. I think that's good. I think we've covered Alien Crossfire, and I know us, and I know that if we keep going, we're going to spend another 2 hours talking about Alpha Centauri, which would be fun, but I don't want to edit that, so I'm going to stop us here.
No, dude, we should if we get passionate enough one of these days, I could go further about this. How this is one of the first multiplayer across the internet games I ever played. I had to dial in the IP address of my buddy's computer in another town, his public IP, and we played via dial-up. It took forever because it was just waiting for a turn or whatever would pop up on the screen. I could talk about this game forever.
We should just do a spin-off podcast that's just the Alpha Centauri that made us. and just once a month bullshit about this game for an hour. But all right. Well, hey, Kirk, thanks for jumping on with me, and we'll tack this on to the Alpha Centauri episode. The release order should have been that when you're listening to this, Metal Slug and Vector Man just came out, and then we'll be doing Alien Crossfire / Alpha Centauri on this episode, and then the next episode will probably be Fear. We haven't forgotten about Fear. We think we're gonna have Benny on that episode. So be watching for that. Again, if you're liking what we're doing, please jump on Discord with us. The link is in the show description. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, all that good nonsense. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And we will talk to you soon.